Well, got it. All right. Well, good morning. My name is Bruce Rinne. I am an information officer here at the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. And I'm here today to make a presentation to Lantern Realty and Development about material facts. I just want to share a little bit about myself. I am an information officer. There are two information officers here at the Real Estate Commission. I answer approximately 8,000 phone calls a year. They're primarily, I'd say 60% are from brokers such as yourself. And the balance are going to be consumers, attorneys, lenders, people, buyers from other states, other governmental agencies calling for information. So my job is to help brokers primarily answer questions about state license law, real estate commission rules, landlord tenant law, Chapter 42, and the Vacation Rental Act, Chapter 42A. And so my responsibility is to help you to be a little bit better at your job, to help head off problems before they become big problems. And then now you're not talking to me, but you're talking to the rest of the folks here at the Real Estate Commission. So what I'd like to do right now is I'd like to start my presentation on material facts. So let's see if I can get this to go. All right. So with this, we're going to be weathering the storm of material facts. I thought that was going to be timely because Chris was talking about the weather and how cold it is. So the learning objectives for this presentation today are, we're going to define what is a material fact. We're going to describe the broker's duty to discover material facts, to distinguish and recognize material facts based on their categorization, and then finally, list best practices for dealing with material facts. Now, something that I would recommend that you all do is that you look at, we have our real estate manual. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. My camera sometimes zooms in and out, but I have this on my desk and I use it every single day to help me be able to provide information to the brokers. We also have another book, which I'll show you in a second, but those are the books that I use. Now, I also have shortcuts to state license law and real estate commission rules and Vacation Rental Act and landlord tenant law that I reference all day long. But these are the things that you can use. The real estate manual is in digital form. I happen to use the hard copy, but it's available in digital form and it's only $25 and it is extremely helpful. I have a lot of conversations with broker in charges that say that, you know, they enjoy our conversations and they wish they had more information available to them. So what you may want to do is invest in some of these digital copies of this and just kind of review them in your sales meeting, different sections of it. What we also recommend is the general update courses and the BIC-UP courses. We recommend that you keep those manuals and you refer back to them because I talked to a broker just yesterday, a BIC, as a matter of fact, been a BIC for 21 years, and she had questions about square footage. And I provided her with our measurement guidelines, but I was able to refer to her BIC-UP course that had talked about square footage and measurement and so forth. So it's a very useful thing to keep and refer back to. So when I was talking about the state law, license law, it's General Statute 93A. And in General Statute 93A, what it does is it established in 1957 the law about brokerage and brokerage services. and the requirement that anyone that provides brokerage service to somebody else for compensation must have a license. A brokerage service is helping somebody sell, buy, lease a property. So that's where you're required to have a license. If you don't own the property, you won't be buying the property. If you won't be leasing the property, but you're a third party to the transaction, you're required to have a license. Then license law goes on to outline and identify the responsibility of the Real Estate Commission and what our responsibilities are. And in subsection 6, it talks about what the authority is and what the Real Estate Commission looks for as far as violations of potential real estate law. So under section 6, it talks about what you can be disciplined for. So a lot of our brokers like to go to 93A-6 to see what the commission, will sanction a broker for. So when we're talking about in this section about material facts, we're talking about making any willful or negligent misrepresentation or any willful or negligent omission of material facts. So we're going to discuss the difference between willful and negligent. We're going to talk misrepresentation and omission. So the general statute imposes a duty on a broker to disclose material facts. So we have our brokers. It's not just the listing agent, it is the buyer's agent. This rule applies to listing agents and buyer's agents must discover and disclose material facts. So even though your seller fills out the residential property disclosure statement to say that they're not representing anything with regards to that property disclosure statement, a listing agent is still required to walk through the property and identify any material facts, and they must disclose them prior to a buyer submitting an offer. It can be in writing or it can be done orally. I'd recommend you do it in writing. So we get a lot of questions. Does this have to be disclosed on the MLS? Not necessarily. It just needs to be disclosed prior to a buyer submitting an offer. Now, it tends to be easier on the broker to make sure that it's disclosed prior to submitting an offer, because I don't know if you're noticing in your market, but certainly in other markets across the state, we have a lot of people that are submitting an offer without a broker, and therefore they may not have the ability to have access to the same forms. They may submit an offer prior to receiving the disclosure from the broker. So what happens is, and I want to talk about this just a little bit more, is that the buyer's agent has the same duty. When walking through a property, your duty is, as being a highly trained professional, to look for those obvious signs of what potential material facts are. Now, a listing agent will spend potentially significantly more time in a property than a buyer's agent will. But that being said, the buyer's agent still has a duty to discover. And it's not just about the property itself in its physical condition, but also pulling permits. Permits are going to be, this year, our #2 reason for complaints, because we've had a lot of people flipping properties. So pulling permits, making sure that the number of bedrooms you're about to advertise matches what the permit says. Municipalities, we are growing like crazy. We have approximately 350,000 people a year moving to North Carolina. And so making sure that, this information is discovered, because a lot of municipalities are putting occupancy limits on properties. So just because it's on a municipal system, you can't have an infinite number of bedrooms. You may be restricted to just 2 or 3 or 4 bedrooms to a property, even though they've converted other rooms into bedrooms. You want to make sure you pull a deed. We have a significant amount of fraudulent sellers going on these days, particularly with vacant land. I would strongly encourage you to verify to the best of your ability, as soon as you get a request for a sale for vacant land, to verify, do your due diligence to confirm that the person you're talking to is in fact the owner of the property. You can go on our website and search our website, and you can inquire about fake sellers, fake buyers. I just wrote an article 2 Decembers ago about fake sellers. It is a large, large problem. Doing your due diligence, I just had a call yesterday about flood zones and making sure the property was in a flood zone. The flood zones are constantly being changed. I had a broker that listed a property yesterday. Well, it was listed a couple of weeks ago, but just yesterday it was found out that the broker listing agent had said, see the previous listings about the property not being in a flood zone. Well, it had been reclassified as being in a flood zone. And now the broker is being asked to pay $13,000 to elevate the heat pumps for this property. So making sure that you're looking and pulling deeds, surveys, flood maps, things like that. These are all material facts that you potentially could find yourself in trouble with the real estate commission. And you may even be sued personally for these things. So buyer's agents have just as much responsibility as a listing agent. Now, I get a lot of calls from people saying, well, if the seller puts no representation, what am I supposed to do as a buyer's agent or a listing agent? Well, I would recommend that you take the Residential Property Owners Association disclosure statement and go through it yourself and inquire and look at the various things of a home to see which ones you may actually have to do your own property disclosure statement. Now, you won't post that. You would create your own disclosure, but that gives you 37 things to look at, and there's a lot of subcategories in there. But making sure that you review these things as a listing agent so you can disclose them, make sure you review these things to the best of your ability, time allotting as the buyer's agent. Now, we recognize that you are highly trained real estate professionals. You're not electricians, you're not plumbers, HVAC, or structural engineers, or roofers, or anything like that, septic people. But what we do expect is that you are highly trained and that we ask, what would a reasonable broker inquire? Floor is sloped. Is that something that would raise your question? There's a lot of settlement cracks along the doorways, the window jambs. Is that something you inquire about? You walk around the house and you see that the fins on the HVAC are rusted, and you want to try and identify the age of the HVAC system. That's a very, very big question. Looking for cracks in foundation, looking for the granules falling off of the shingles. These are all things that you should be looking for. So let's talk a little bit more. So what is a material fact? A material fact is any fact that could affect a reasonable person's decision to buy, sell, or lease. So with that, we'll take a look at, this is 2020 to 2021 disciplinary actions. 47% of the complaints that we received that year were material facts. 19% were trust account issues. 10% were agency, 9% were contracts, property management issues, and then 9% other. So you can see almost half of the complaints that we get are material fact complaints. So let's take a look at the material facts. Of them, 30% of the material fact complaints we get are on structural issues. Now, here's the thing. If something, let's use, there was a fire, okay, in a kitchen, and the cabinets burned, the stove burned, the floor burned, what have you. A general contractor is brought in, And licensed contractors, electricians, plumbers, HVAC, whomever was required, came in, pulled the permits, did the work that was required, was signed off, a final certificate of occupancy was signed off on. The property was returned to the same condition or better, then it would not have to be disclosed. So anytime you repair something, it does not have to be disclosed, provided you do what I just said, having a licensed professional, pulling a permit where necessary and having it signed off. There is one exception to the rule. Anytime there is a structural issue with a property, regardless if the general contractor actually did the work on the property, permits were pulled, inspections were done, COs were obtained, and it was returned to the same condition or better, structural issues will always have to be disclosed going forward. It is the only thing that needs to be disclosed going forward after it's been repaired. So please pay attention to structural issues. Now, square footage is number 2. We have a lot of companies using technology to measure their homes for the brokers. It's great, but you need to make sure that the company that's doing these measurements for you, they know the rules. Like, for instance, what do you do with a 2-story foyer? How do you measure that? Are they checking to make sure that there are heat vents? Are they checking to make sure that the materials that were used to finish off a basement are materials generally accepted for interior construction? Are they giving credit for heated living area that has a concrete floor or cinder block walls or unfinished ceilings? So making sure that they're aware of what the rules are, not just measuring square footage, is very, very important. So the Real Estate Commission does not require that you advertise square footage. That's actually most likely a requirement of your local MLS. As such, if you are going to advertise it, whatever you advertise, we require it to be accurate. So we want to make sure that you're properly advertising the correct amount of square footage in a property. Now, the other issue is lots, subdivisions, and roads. We have a lot of problems with vacant lots, making sure that the people who are selling the lots are the rightful owners of the lots, and taking a look at I had a long conversation with a gentleman last night. He was buying a vacant lot in Franklinton, and he didn't want to have an attorney involved, and he was paying $190,000 for a single lot that had been for sale 5 times over the past 10 years and had never sold. And he was going to pay cash and wasn't going to have any title work done, wasn't going to have any due diligence. And I strongly advised him to get a broker to help him with that, to figure out what exactly happened. So lots, subdivisions, we have a lot of our developers trying to sell their properties as quickly as they can, and they list the property before they have a recorded plat, a legal identification of an individual lot, or PIN numbers or addresses. So be aware that you got to make sure that you have that. If you're looking for the specifics on the rules on that, take a look at Form 12T, which is the offer to purchase for vacant lot land. And the very top paragraph goes into great detail as to how to be careful about listing or purchasing a property that has not been properly recorded. Now, permits, I had said this year will go from 10% of our complaints to being more than 30% of our complaints. A lot of people flipping properties. We had a lot of people that weren't selling their properties. They were just improving their properties because of COVID, and they were doing a lot of work without pulling the permits. So permits are huge. This one is, I guess, one of my personal bugaboos is that when you are listing a property, when you're helping somebody buy a property, please verify that it is in fact on a municipal sewer system, community sewer system, or septic system. Please verify the water source, well, community, or municipal water system. Even though your client tells you that it's one particular way, I strongly encourage you to verify with the municipality, because a lot of times people think that water and sewer are included together when they may have sewer, but they may have a well and not know about it. Every day I get calls because a broker did not verify the sewer system or septic system and the water source. So please verify that. Then the rest are just other material facts. Now, there are four categories of material facts. One is facts about the property itself. So that could be, you know, a roof or a rotted porch or bad steps or what have you. Next are facts that relate directly to the property, which would be highways going in nearby. We have tremendous growth, so we have subdivisions popping up all over. And you would not believe the number of phone calls I get where somebody bought a house and find out that their property adjacent to theirs is actually going to be an access road for a townhouse community of 300 townhouses. Making sure that you're aware of what's going around the property itself is going to be a huge, huge issue coming up in the future. Now, facts that affect a principal's ability to complete the transaction. So principals are buyers and sellers. Is it part of an estate? Last year at this time, I would get 2 to 3 phone calls a day about properties being in estates because of COVID. So making sure that the property can be sold, identifying who the executor or executrix or trustee or administrator or guardianship. If there has to be an ad litem, identifying all the beneficiaries or heirs. Be very, very careful with properties that are in an estate. Make sure that you work with an estate attorney to make sure that you're getting the rightful owners of the property to sign the listing agreement, to sign the offer to purchase and contract, to sign the final settlement statement and deed. So facts that are known to be of special importance to a party. I just had a conversation, I guess it was about 8:45 this morning, from a broker, from a BIC actually, that they handle a gated community. And the HOA, just a bunch of new board people got on the board and reviewed the covenants and realized that the covenants of 30 years said that they could not have short-term rentals as they defined it, a rental less than 30 days. There is now over 100 property owners. It's a condo association, 100 property owners that are now suing their homeowners association, their property owners association, because they do short-term rentals. So the broker wanted to know, is that something that needs to be disclosed to a potential buyer? So that would be important to a buyer to say, are there short-term rentals in here? Do they allow them? Do they not allow them? Is that what your buyer is looking for, short-term rental, or is your buyer looking for a subdivision that doesn't have short-term rentals? Now, let's talk about facts about the property. Leaks. Leaks are a very big problem. And we have a lot of times where people will just say, spray Kills on it and then paint over it, and you're good to go. Foundation issues, those are those structural issues that we talked about. You want to walk around the property and make sure that, looking at it, are there, large settlement cracks? Are there cracks that go down through the middle of blocks instead of around the edges of blocks? Malfunctioning appliances, those are material facts that, the stove, if the oven doesn't work, the dishwasher doesn't work. Those are appliances. By the way, another appliance are gas logs. Gas logs are considered appliances. They're not considered a heat source. They're considered an appliance. Now, unpermitted space, we had talked a lot about it, and we're going to be talking a lot more in the future about it. But unpermitted space, whether or not unpermitted space can be considered in the heated living area or not, it cannot. Health and safety issues, is the floor spongy? Is there mold? Is there mildew? Is there a serious water infiltration problem in the crawl space? What about pests? What about infestations of rodents? Facts relating to the property. So we had talked about zoning. I had somebody who has a commercial, I got this call last Thursday, I believe, has a property that is zoned IO, industrial office. But in order to get it on Zillow, the owner of the property asked if it could be listed as residential, because at one time it was listed residential, but the owner of the property had it changed to IO, and they believe it can be changed back. So they wanted to list it as residential so it could go on Zillow. You can only advertise what the property really is. So check the zoning. Road improvements, what's going on in the area. Your area is booming and there's so much road construction going on. Be aware of any interchanges and off ramps and so forth. I had somebody who it's off of 40, there's going to be a new extension. There was an off ramp that would actually literally be taking a home, and it was marked off by flags, surveyor flags, where the road was going to go. The listing agent pulled up all the flags, sold the property, and 3 months later, the DOT came by and told the sellers that they have to get out because they were taking the house. So be aware. Neighborhood changes, as I was talking about, are they going to be putting in a townhouse community right behind it? Are they going to be putting in apartment complexes? Are they going to be putting in shopping centers? What's going on in the neighborhood? Flood zones, very, very big. One thing I didn't mention before when we were talking about the residential property disclosure statement is that we are actually reworking it. We put up a new version of the property disclosure statement in June and July, requesting feedback from our brokers as to any suggestions to make changes on it. Well, by August 1st, we got 624 recommendations for changes to the residential property disclosure statement. We are going through all of them. We currently have increased the size of the property disclosure statement to now it is 8 pages. Now I know that although all of your mics were turned off, I heard a collective groan that it's going to be 8 pages, but it protects the seller, it protects the brokers, it protects the buyers by providing more information about the property. So in that, we have included 5 questions about flood zones. So please be aware that flood zones is a very big issue. We'll probably have the new property disclosure statement out within the next couple of months. Now, facts affecting the performance of a party. One is whether or not your client has been denied a loan. Liens and title issues, making sure that you can do as a listing agent, make sure your seller is going to be able to provide a general warranty deed by making sure that all the liens are going to be satisfied. Bankruptcy, making sure that the other parties are aware of the bankruptcy, any financial constraints. So a contract, a standard residential offer to purchase and contract, is based upon the fact that it is not contingent on a buyer being able to obtain a loan and is not contingent on the buyer selling their other property. In effect, your offer to purchase and contracts are really just contracts that are for cash. So when a buyer changes from, let's say they're going to do cash to a conventional loan, does that need to be disclosed? Not necessarily. But if a buyer is changing from cash or a conventional loan to an FHA or VA loan, does that need to be disclosed? It does. It's a material fact because it changes some of the terms and conditions of the contract, meaning that an appraisal would have to be an FHA appraisal, which will stay with the land for 4 months. If it's a VA loan, the VA appraisal stays with the land for 6 months. That may not be an original term that the seller agreed to. Making repairs may be a requirement that the seller did not originally agree to. So these are some of the things that you need to be aware of, that if they change from conventional or cash to an FHA or VA, that is a material fact, and the seller does not have to agree to it because it wasn't agreed to originally, and therefore the buyer may lose their due diligence and earnest money if they're unable to get a loan. Pending foreclosure, very important. We unfortunately have a lot of that going on because a lot of folks were buying properties with adjustable rate mortgages, and these rates have gone up very, very high. Estate issues I talked about when somebody passes, making sure that you get that clarified. Now, facts of special importance to your client. One is, does your client need a home-based business? And if so, does the HOA or the local municipality allow them to do that? Are they allowed to park their vehicles that have their company name on it? Are they allowed to see customers at their property? So making sure that a home-based business is allowed. The ability to rent, just as I was talking about that HOA who was saying they would no longer allow short-term rentals. Certain animals, chickens, big issue, believe it or not. Also look into dangerous breeds, right? There are a lot of municipalities and HOAs that have special ordinances against particular types of breeds. Now, it doesn't just have to be dogs, let's say. There are ordinances against having venomous snakes, venomous animals. So making sure if your client has that it's going to be okay by the local ordinances as well as the HOA. And if they have to do any improvements to the property, let's say that the buyer is disabled and needs to create a ramp. Can they create a ramp without encroaching onto another person's property or going into the right-of-way by the DOT? Now, red flags of previous potential buyers. The reason for the buyer's cancellation often creates a material fact. They often will terminate. Let me get that white. They will often have to terminate because of the inspection report, which brings up, can an inspection report be shared if the buyer says no, it cannot? The answer is yes. Once the inspection report is shared with the listing agent, then the presumption of confidentiality and ownership of the buyer is no longer valid because they shared it. They cannot restrict the seller from sharing it or the listing agent from sharing it unless they have a written agreement otherwise. So you can share these inspection reports only after you, as a listing agent, have written permission, and the key is written permission from your seller to disclose that inspection report. So you have to make disclosures to all subsequent buyers because we will have many, every day, multiple times a day, I will talk to brokers who have said, we're the third buyers, we're the fourth buyers, we're the fifth buyers. And what these sellers are doing is just collecting these due diligence fees to fix up their property and then take their property off the market. Amendments of RPOs may be appropriate. So make sure that if your seller is filling it out, that they adjust the residential property and owners association disclosure statement if they've checked yes or no. Now, we'll talk about the seller has no obligation to disclose material facts. They can put no representation. However, the seller of 1 to 4 residential units must still complete the property disclosure statement and the mineral oil and gas disclosure statement. Failure to provide the residential property disclosure statement and mineral oil and gas creates the right of rescission. So in the contract, it says that if they don't receive it within 3 days of going under contract, the buyer can unilaterally terminate the contract by using Form 350T and get their due diligence money back. So it creates a right of rescission. I got a little ahead of myself there. What's not a material fact? The death or serious illness of a previous property occupant. So you don't have to disclose that. Convicted sex offenders occupying, or residing near a property is not a material fact. We get sadly too many calls like that. Having someone who has AIDS or HIV, their status of a current or former occupant, and these disclosures are all really about federal fair housing issues. And then finally, no broker may knowingly make a false statement regarding any such fact. Now, here's just a list of some of the recent calls that I've had about material facts. Listing agent failed to notice 1 bedroom did not have floor vents. So making sure that you check each of the bedrooms, because if it doesn't have a permanent heat source, it cannot be considered a heated living area. So look for those floor vents. Now, just because there's floor vents, I had somebody who all the second floor had floor vents. Unfortunately, there was no vent or no ductwork connected to the vents. There were just holes in the floor. And the owner of the property was just using the heat from the first floor to heat the second floor, just through holes in the floor. Make sure that the property is not in a flood zone, but be aware that there's runoff from roads that can end up in flooding of a property. New subdivisions are going in all the time, as we said. And as a result, these roads are creating a lot of runoff, and there's a lot of flooding of properties. So even though they're not in a FEMA designated flood zone, there is flooding that goes on in properties. Owner, broker, but no representation on the RPOs and no additional disclosure. If you are a broker and you own a property that you are selling, by state law, you are not required to do the Residential Property Owners Association disclosure statement. That being said, as a licensee, you are required to discover and disclose all material facts. So by state law, you're covered. By Real Estate Commission rules, you are not. You must disclose all material facts. And by the way, you cannot represent an unrepresented buyer. When and how to disclose material facts on the MLS, agent only remarks. So the question that we have is that how do we disclose these things? Do I put these in the public remarks, agent only remarks, or just in where you keep your disclosures? As I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of people who are coming to North Carolina and they're submitting their own offers. They don't have the benefit of having access to agent-only remarks. So that's not always a fail-safe to you, and they don't always reach out to you prior to submitting an offer. I had someone who had questioned whether or not an outdoor shower could be counted in the number of full baths. And the answer is no, because it must be in heated living area, and it was an outdoor shower. But it was a beach property, and they wanted to count it in their number of full baths. I also had somebody who had an outhouse. And what I had what they did was they moved the outhouse and actually physically attached it to the exterior of the house and claimed that that was a bathroom. And then they put a bathtub on the second floor and claimed that they had one full bath. That was not the case. Are polybutylene pipes a material fact? Polybutylene pipes are not a material fact in of themselves. What makes them a material fact is if they have a history of leaking. You must disclose the history of leaking. Repaired structural issues need to be disclosed. We talked quite a bit about that. They do need to be disclosed. Covenants changing 3 days prior to closing. A lot of HOAs are made aware of that a property is going to be used for an Airbnb, and they are changing their covenants. Pull the covenants on the way to closing and review, look for any updates that limit Airbnb or VRBO or what have you, if your client is going to be doing that, offering that. Listing agent knew the mineral rights were sold on the vacant land, but did not disclose. So we have a lot of lithium mines that are being discovered around North Carolina. And the listing agent did not disclose that that mineral had been sold by the previous owner. A 1950s home was moved to a new lot on a new foundation. Is it new construction was actually the question I got. It's still a 1950s home, just put on a new foundation. They would still have to disclose the lead-based paint addendum. So basically, I just want to cover best practice is always do a thorough visual inspection of the property, inquire about room additions and permits, ask questions seeking material information, make disclosures in writing at the soonest possible time, preferably prior to contract, and review and provide the residential property disclosure statement, mineral oil and gas statement to see if there's anything that stands out in your mind and what would be a particular interest if you're representing a buyer. And so with that, that's really the end of my presentation. And what I'd like to do is open up the floor to any questions. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Hey, Bruce, I got one for you. Actually, I got two. Marie Skelnick sent one in on chat and said, is there a time limit of these structural repairs to disclose? What if it was, what if the repairs were done 10 years ago?
Then they still need to be disclosed.
Okay.
They forever need to be disclosed. It's the only thing that needs to be done.
Would a fire be considered a structural issue and need to be disclosed as well?
Great question. It depends if the fire affects any of the structural components of the home. So if it's the rafters and it burns through the roof, or it burns through the joists, or it burns the band or sill plate or anything like that, then yeah, that would be a structural issue that would need to be disclosed. But if it's more cosmetic or not a structural issue, it does not have to be disclosed. Okay. Now, we have damage, for instance, I get a lot of calls that if there's a fire in an attic, sellers will take kills and paint over the charred timbers so they don't smell. So that's a very common, temporary solution, but it must be disclosed.
Second question. I had a listing and we had went under contract a couple of times and got a couple of home inspections, but the buyers would never release the home inspection. Okay. So the buyer's agent is in possession of material facts, but they're not disclosing them. Right. Am I thinking correctly, or how do you handle that?
Right. So the rule is regardless. So let's take it from the top. Brokers are responsible for discovering and disclosing material facts, whether it's the listing agent or buyer's agent. once a material fact is discovered, it must be disclosed. So if a buyer's agent identifies a material fact, they are required by their license to disclose that to the listing agent or any interested third party. An interested third party would be, say, a lender that was doing a short sale. So anyone that is an interested third party, whoever discovers that material fact must disclose it to the other party.
Okay. Alan Cuthbertson had a question. How do you recommend handling unpermitted space?
Well, so the key for unpermitted space is just disclosure. You disclose it to a buyer as comprehensive a disclosure as possible is best. You may even, on some of these disclosures, you may even want to contact an attorney and have an attorney write up the disclosure to make sure that you're protecting your seller and yourself. Because if you take a look at the contracts, section 8H, when it talks about government compliance and making sure that a property is within government compliance, your seller needs to be aware that if they don't disclose that ahead of time, they have, according to the contract, the option to either fix it prior to closing, or the buyer has the opportunity to terminate and get all of their money back, or they can accept the property as is. But full disclosure is the key in it. So they don't have to force the seller to get it permitted. It may be in the seller's best interest. I would recommend a broker doing their due diligence and inquiring, what does it take to get this property permitted, and present that to their seller to see if it's worthwhile doing or not. Just had a caller before I got online with you that had an issue with a homeowner that HVAC system needs to be completely replaced, and it hasn't worked in 20 years. And so they've just used portable electric heaters in each room. And so that they're going to need to get a new HVAC system. HVAC systems, when they're replaced, need to be permitted. And so be aware, if your client says, oh, great, new HVAC, it's only a year old, pull the permit and verify that it was in fact permitted. These are all things that pulling the permits, being familiar with your register of deeds and the ability to pull permits, you're very comfortable with.
Tim Auburn, go ahead, Tim.
I'll let Rochelle, we both have a question, so I'm gonna let
Okay.
Okay, so I have a client that is wanting to sell a newer home, and they the stairs are like pulling away from the wall. So she said, you know, when I saw it, I'm like, you just, you know, bought this home a few years ago, what's going on? And she goes, well, we caulked it. We've recaulked it and it's pulled away again, and we've reached out to the builder but haven't heard back. So is that going to be an issue where I don't know that it's structural, they don't know that it's structural? You know, how do I make sure I'm not hiding a material fact?
Rochelle, that's a wonderful question. And the thing is, you don't know. And we don't expect you to know if it's a structural issue. We don't expect the seller to know that it's a structural issue. But what you have done is you have identified there's a potential for a structural issue. Therefore, you do one of two things. You disclose to a future buyer that the staircase has been pulling away from the walls, and the seller has inquired of the builder to address that. Or you get a structural engineer to go out there and do an evaluation of that staircase and give you a written report as to what repairs would be necessary for that. and provide that report. Or you have that structural engineer provide the report and then have the seller make the repairs per the report. Once they have done that, if it is not a structural issue, you do not need to disclose it. So these are some different steps that your seller can take that may increase what they get their property for if they decide not to do anything, and may cause them to lose value on the property. But that's a decision for your seller to make and what they're willing to invest in the property to sell. Did that answer that, Rochelle?
Perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
I actually have a follow-up to
Yeah,
your response. So if in that scenario, if it was a licensed GC that went out and said, hey, there's no structural issue here, it just needs, just the seal of the caulk that has
Mhm.
cracked.
yeah.
And, he says that's all that needs to be done. Is that insufficient because we didn't have a structural engineer come out?
Well, here's so what we request of our brokers is what would a reasonable person do, right? So if a reasonable person said, I have a GC that goes out and says it's not a structural issue, but we know that this thing keeps pulling away from the wall, there's a problem. Something's happening, right? We know it because it has a history of it. At that point, I don't know that I would just rely on a GC's comment. I would take it a step further and have a structural engineer take a look at it. Or disclose that this has a history of the staircase pulling away, however far away from the wall it's been pulling away. Because what happens, Tim, is failing to disclose that, what you must be aware of is if you fail to disclose that and somebody gets hurt, that staircase falls away. As the movers are moving that king-size waterbed up the stairs and it collapsed and a mover gets injured, it's going to be on the new owners who's going to turn around and sue the seller, who's going to turn around and file a complaint with the real estate commission about their listing agent that failed to advise them to have a structural engineer looking at something that has a history of being a potential problem. So covering yourself is very, very important on that.
Good. I just wanted to be able to share the importance with the client on why they need to invest. It's a significant cost to have a structural engineer to give a report.
Without a doubt, but it's a lot less expensive than being sued.
Yeah. So the second question that I had before that was, I had a property, I was the buyer's agent. We had a property that we went under contract on in Concord. The listing agent was also the owner. Her and her husband had remodeled the home. She said, we had a lot of issues that came up on the inspection report. They were unwilling to repair them. And I asked, hey, was any of this work permitted? Because there were still polybutylene pipes in the home. There were, water leaks. There were GFCIs installed that weren't actually operating. And so there was clearly some new things that I thought should have been permitted. I reached out to the county said, and the city basically said, hey, if you can give us a detailed list of what was done, we can tell you whether or not we would have required that to be permitted. The listing agent said, well, our contractor told us nothing needed to be permitted and didn't give us a detailed invoice. We just have kind of a, bathroom remodel was this much and kitchen remodel was this much, countertops were this much, but it didn't itemize everything. What's reasonable in that circumstance? My client considered reaching out to the commission or having me reach out to the commission about that. What should she have done, or what could I have done differently in that sense?
Great great question. So I just want to make sure this is a owner broker. Is that
Owner
correct?
broker, yes.
Okay. So an owner broker that is flipping a property, that is remodeling a bathroom, would know if a toilet was moved, would know if a sink was changed out,
That
would
would-
know if a shower stall. So not having a list of things done, they own the property, they are brokers, they know if there's been changes made to that property. They cannot hide behind the fact that they did not have an itemized statement from the contractor. They are trying to shirk their responsibility, push it off on the GC. It is not the GC's fault. They own the property. They should be aware of what was done to their property, because it wasn't like they just bought the property and then came back one day and everything was done and they didn't recognize anything different, yet they were marketing that it was a remodeled bath or whatever they were. My advice is to file a complaint with us and give us an opportunity to investigate. And if we find something wrong, we will address that with the broker. It may result in sanctions going in front of the commissioners. They could lose their license. They could have it suspended. The BIC could lose their license or have their license suspended. The firm could lose their license. Permits are a huge deal. And that's why, saying that a contractor didn't give me an itemized invoice, but I'm a licensed real estate professional, I should know that if you're changing any plumbing, if there was a single electrical outlet change, a change in vent or structural change, or a light fixture change or a light switch change, all of that has to be permitted. And so not knowing that it needs to be permitted, this person, we need to have a conversation with them. And we need to let them know that in the future, it needs to be permitted. So, because people are getting harmed by this. People are dying because of this, because we have brokers going out there flipping properties thinking it's easy money, not getting anything permitted, and these houses are burning down. People are getting injured. They're losing all of their assets. It's horrible what is going on out there. So if you encounter something like this, file a complaint with us. That's what this presentation is all about, is material facts. So you guys are aware of what's going on, so you can help us protect the citizens of North Carolina, And so, yeah, if you run into somebody who's very cavalier about this and just, dismissing it, file a complaint. We may not take their license away. We may not suspend their license, but we'll have a conversation with them that I promise you going forward, they won't do it again, because what's right is right. You've got a very important job, and it's a tremendous amount of responsibility that you have. And this is one of them, to protect your fellow citizens of North Carolina. So great
Chris,
question.
Thank you. Chris, she was not a licensed or an agent with Lantern, just to,
I knew it would not be one of Lantern's brokers.
I was worried there for a minute, Tim. Thanks for clarification.
Sure.
Good one. I know I covered a lot of territory. So if anything that we talked about, and you have any more questions, call me or call Leslie, the other information officer here at the Real Estate Commission. You just have to dial 919-719-9180. That will get you to regulatory affairs, where I work. We're divided into two groups. We are regulatory affairs. There's about close to 30 of us, 8 attorneys, some paralegals, admins, and lots of investigators and auditors. And then the other half of the Real Estate Commission is education and licensing. So if any questions about your license or something, needing to do with educational requirements, maybe you want to be an instructor, you would talk to education and licensing. But call us. That's what we're here for. Also, if you want to email me, I'd like to give you my email address, which is just my first initial B, and then last name Rinne, R-I-N-N-E. So it's BRINNE at NCREC.gov. And I'll be happy to answer your question. I will tell you on Mondays are our busiest days. And from about 2 o'clock on every afternoon is when our call volume is very, very high. So if you'd like to talk to us, call earlier in the day if you can, we can get back to you more quickly. It's extremely rare that we don't get back to you the same day unless you call after we're closed or something like that. Okay.
Bruce, I appreciate your time. I did put your email in the chat box for everybody.
Nice.
I have called the commission on numerous occasions for numerous different things, and I would encourage folks to not be afraid to do so as well. They are extremely helpful.
Yeah.
And it's not the evil empire in Raleigh. They're there to help us navigate these waters. So I would encourage you to put their phone number in your phone and don't be afraid to use it.
I completely agree. I have brokers that.
Can somebody put the
literally-
phone number on the group chat, please?
Yeah, I will.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I have brokers that call me once a week. Seriously, they do not, brokers who have been in the business for 40 years call me. Just a little factoid. The average length of time that a broker is in business, you've had your broker's license, that has a complaint filed against them, is they've been in business for 15 years. So it is not our provisional brokers that are getting the bulk of the complaints, as you might expect. It's because they're being trained to what's happening today. And so it's the more experienced brokers that are not, necessarily up to speed. That's what these programs are all about, is to act as a refresher and to give you an opportunity to ask real life questions and scenarios of what's been going on in your real estate career.
So you're telling me I got 5 more years before I got to get out of the business. That's what it
Yeah,
sounds like.
I would just call it a day, Chris, because that's what we see them coming in. It's just really surprising, but the average length of time is 15 years. Surprising. So
Well, Bruce, we really appreciate it, and I imagine we will attempt to have you on again sometime this year.
we would love the opportunity, and we'd love to do it in person so we can sit down.
Oh,
and
yeah.
just
Okay.
talk. And we can take all day. There's not a time limit on this. You got questions. That's what they make fun of me here. They call me Google because you got a question, I have an answer. And so, but that's what I want to do is I genuinely want to help you make this a better industry for yourself, a profession, and to protect the citizens of North Carolina. So whatever we can do to that end, we will do.
Well, thank you very much, and we appreciate what you do, and we will be in touch again soon.
That sounds good. Y'all
Thanks,
take care.
Bruce.
Have a good one. All right.
You
Bye.
too. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bruce.